I am really pleased to introduce our next speaker, who's going to be presenting our closing remarks. Dr. Margaret Anderson is the Edward F. and Elizabeth Goodman Rosenberg Professor of Sociology with joint appointments in Black American Studies and Women's Studies at the University of Delaware. Dr. Anderson has a distinguished career as a race and gender scholar and is a true advocate for faculty diversity. She has served in several senior administrative positions at the University of Delaware, including Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs and Diversity, Executive Director of the President's Diversity Initiative, the Interim Deputy Provost. We have a lot of administrators, and the titles seem to change over time, which you probably are all aware of, hence some of the fumbling over some of the titles, and Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. And I have to, interject here that actually Maggie was my dean when I came in as an assistant professor, and she was very integral in onboarding me and brought me in to help with diversity efforts in our college. I mean, I was part of that mission of what she does, and that's a personal life story. I am sure there's so many women on this campus, and faculty of color, I mean, they're very underrepresented, but those who are here, I hope can all say the same things about her, and I'm confident that they can. So in each of these capacities, she took active steps to improve the representation, retention, and advancement of women faculty and women faculty of color. She's also a leading race and gender scholar, both nationally and internationally. And I had a similar thought about this international sort of reputation that comes up all the time, but we can say this about Maggie happily. She is the author of several books. I'm going to just name a few. And as other people have mentioned, there are bios in your packet of materials, and so you can see Dr. Anderson's full bio in there. She's the author of a book titled Thinking About Women, which is currently in its 10th edition, which should give you a sense of her influence. She's the author of a best-selling anthology titled Thinking About Race that's co-edited with Patricia Hill Collins, and another book titled Race, Ethnicity, and Society, The Changing Landscape. She's also completing a new book titled Race and Society, The Enduring American Dilemma, which is going to be forthcoming in 2017. I am sure it'll be very, very impactful. I'd like to thank everyone for participating in this conference. I can't tell you how heartwarmed and over the moon I am at the turnout, the people who traveled from long distances, the people who shared their stories and their research results. This was really way better than as part of the writing team for preparing the grant proposal. This has turned out just beautifully, and it's because of the participants that came to this conference. So I just really have to say thank you very, very much. And so now I'd like to turn the microphone over to our speaker.
I was sort of hoping you'd leave those parts up there.
Do you want those up there?
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Up here.
Proud to say Emily was one of my students. But I've been around long enough, I can say that about a lot of people. Well, I have been given an absolutely impossible task, and I'll tell you what it was because I don't know that that's really what I'm going to do. My task was to sum up this conference, but also to talk about next steps. So I'm not going to attempt to sum up this incredibly rich conference. I've gotten so much from it. I'm, like the rest of you, both exhilarated and also tired, but ready to move on to next steps. So I also want to say that I think the next step is, I'm talking to the wrong group, okay? I look out, and you all get this. You don't need to hear what I'm going to say because I've been hearing from you for this weekend. About things you know. So your next step is going to be to take my message back to your department chairs, your deans, and your provosts, and the academic leadership of your institutions, because it's really them that I'm talking to. Now, I also want to say that as we kicked off the conference and went through the day, it has struck me, including President Targett's comments, how much water and boats and ships have kind of figured into some of the dialogue that we've been having. So I wore my sailboat necklace with that in mind. I will say I am a sailor when I have the time to do it, which is not enough. And so sometimes I want to frame, to keep up with this maritime metaphor, I want to frame what I'm going to say by thinking about two boats. Because I'm a sailor, and what we do when we need to change course, especially if we feel some urgency to it, is we tack really quickly and can move rather quickly. But the problem is we are sometimes tacking around these gigantic tankers. And I don't know what any of you know about these boats. They take 3 miles to stop. So you really don't want to be in front of them. And sometimes I think about that as a metaphor for what we're trying to do. We all want to change the institution, with the kind of grace and beauty of a sailboat, when often what it feels like, frankly, is we're trying to move the tanker. So the theme of what I want to talk about today is institutional change, and that's what I would ask you to take back to the academic leadership. Now, I didn't fully not do my homework, but I do, and I should say I want to thank all the note takers who sent me notes on all of the sessions that you went to that I received at about 9:30 last night. But sorry, I did not read them. I didn't use them to frame my talk this morning. So I'm only going to highlight a couple of themes that I heard in the rich sessions I went to. But then, because I'm a sociologist, I want to try to give you a framework for thinking about what you've heard. So I heard the importance of the need for measuring invisible work, something that sociologists have actually worked on in studies of housework for many years. I heard about the importance of sharing some of the institutional practices that the Advance Project has inspired. I heard about the fact that the racism and the sexism that we all face, and I say that as a white woman because I face it too, but not in the same way that many of you do, is systemic, not just individual. It's experienced at both of those levels. I heard that we need to change some of the standards for the promotion and tenuring of faculty. That's the one I'm probably the most pessimistic about. I heard that there's life outside the university that we really need to remember, and that may actually be much of the focus of my talk today. And I also heard about the importance of self-care, including in what President Target just said to you. I'm going to confess there's one credential that Robin didn't mention. I am a proud member of the Bayard Institute, as you might have guessed. All right. So what I'm going to do today is not worry so much about detailing all the things that you've heard, learned, said, and contributed, but to try to give you a framework for trying to move forward. Now, as sociologists, we love concepts, right? And one of the concepts that I use a lot is what in the literature is called a gendered institution. And a gendered institution, you all know them well, is an institution where the division of labor, the hierarchy, the structure of the institution itself, its symbols, its interactions, all of that are very highly gendered for a particular group for whom the institution has been built, such as higher education. Now, I would add to that, and I won't go into great detail about it, these institutions are also quite raced, if you can stand my language there. And I find that concept very helpful for me to know what that tanker is that I'm trying to tack around and change the course of. But there's another concept that I've drawn on today in these comments that I want to tell you about, because institutions are also greedy. Greedy institutions is a concept that a team of sociologists way back in 1974 developed. Coincidentally, that was my first year at the University of Delaware. And a footnote, by the way, Nancy, you're not the oldest person in the room. I am, I think. So in 1974, Lewis and Rose Kozer, although the publication came out only in his name because, as was typical at the time, the faculty wife got no credit, but later she did. They developed the concept of a greedy institution, and I'm going to read their definition as a quotation. Greedy institutions, the Kozers wrote, quote, aim at maximizing assent to their styles of life by appearing highly desirable to the participant. They offer exclusive benefits to their members, access to truth, the honor of being among the chosen ones, the illuminated, to be a member of the elite, and exclusive access to the powerful. But at the same time, greedy institutions weaken or even sever existing ties to relatives, friends, lovers, or forbid them completely. The relationship between the greedy institution and the individual is assumed to be exclusive and does not tolerate competition. They go on to say, the Kozers go on to say, greedy institutions make total claims on their members, attempting to encompass their whole personality. They seek exclusive and undivided loyalty. End of quote. Now, as I said, the Kozers were writing in 1974. And since then, think about what has happened. Institutions have been resistant to change, even while women's lives, and to a great extent men's as well, have completely been revolutionized. Right? But institutions are very conservative forces. They don't change easily, and therefore they produce some of the issues that we've been talking about at this conference that are both raced and gendered. In fact, I would say that since the Kozers were writing in the early 1970s, institutions have become even more greedy. The rise of technology, for example, may on the one hand make our work easier, but it also means it is ever present. Right? That's why I ignored all your late night emails last night. The University of Virginia president, Terry Sullivan, calls this continuous connectivity. So the 24/7 nature of electronic and global communication means now there's a blurred boundary between work and other parts of life. And in fact, I read an interesting piece over during the week. It used to be a mark of status to have leisure time, and now it seems to be a mark of status to say you're busy all the time, because leisure is no longer valued. Right? And we tend to affirm that. How many times have you heard in conversation with your friends, they say, oh, I'm just so busy, I'm just so busy. And it's almost like an identity claim now. I know it's true, we're all really busy, right? But why can't we just say, I'm resting, right? Can I be left alone for a while? So greedy institutions have produced something that I have called tenure creep. Right? You've heard about it. I don't have a formal definition of it exactly. But it is the ever-rising expectations, or the ever-rising expectations of the criteria for promotion and tenure. And I'm going to confess now, and I heard this talked about in one of the sessions yesterday, there is no way that I would get tenure or promotion at the University of Delaware now. And I don't think I've been a failure. But tenure creep has so escalated what junior scholars are expected to do that honestly I think it's sort of amazing that any people make it, all right? And what worries me a bit, and I don't want to be too pessimistic here at the end because you're supposed to be taking this message back, right? Is that as much as we've talked about changing the way that service and mentoring and teaching are measured, the reality is not just in research universities, but it is your scholarly research that gets you promoted and gets you the kind of status in most institutions that we're seeking. The other thing I'm concerned about, and I say this a little hesitatingly because I'm aware that I'm in a room full of scientists, is I also see that the norm for publication has become somewhat more singular for those of us who are in the social sciences, humanities, the arts, and so forth, that the norm of, I don't like the word, scholarly productivity has come to match that is more typical in research laboratories where people have funding, where they have assistants, and also in elite institutions where people may actually have somewhat shorter semesters, more support, lower teaching loads than probably many of you in this room do. And yet the standards, right, are becoming kind of hegemonic, if you can stand a really big fancy sociological term. It just means penetrating reality in normal language. So I find it a little bit telling that tenure creep seems to be happening at the very time when women and people of color, women of color, are beginning to be somewhat more of a presence in higher education. I came along at a time, maybe some of you did, when the men who were my senior colleagues just got tenure. They never had to go through anything like the procedures that we go through now. And talk about an aha moment, I remember a moment, I think it was probably in the mid-1990s, so the current administration was off the hook here, okay? I was sitting in a room of deans, vice provosts, and the provost, and we were talking about the promotion and tenure procedures, and the provost just asked, it was a white male, how many of us in the room had actually gone through anything like the promotion and tenure procedures that scholars go through now. And the only people in that room who raised their hand were the women administrators. All right. Now, that would not be true today for your male colleagues, but it tells you something about how standards are creeping up and up, even while our lives have been revolutionized in other ways. So the fact is that faculty career ladders are more steep than ever, and I think the advanced project, that this is something we have to grapple with. So I am a sociologist. I'm not going to talk purely conceptually. I had to look up a little bit of data, and I know it's the end of the conference, and I'm the only one standing between, now and some time when you all have to leave. But I do have to point to some of the empirical evidence, all right? I was very surprised to learn this week as I was preparing this talk. What do you think the median age for completion of a PhD is nationally, counting all fields? Got a guess? Oh my God, scientists, I forgot. Empirical scholars, it is 32 years old. 33 for women. Now that means, given a normal tenure clock, that people are getting tenure around 40. Now, I don't want to essentialize women, or men for that matter, as biological creatures, but that does mean that that is happening at precisely the time when people are most likely to be forming whatever families and permanent relationships they are forming. And it's simply out of sync with the career norms in our disciplines. Now, what I find in talking to younger women today is they, on the one hand, are often less aware of the gendered nature of institutions, because the good news is that younger women don't have to face some of the same issues that women of my generation did. I was told as a college first-year student, I was a math honors student on a full scholarship, so I might have been a scientist, but when I went for help, because I was a little bit lost, I can still see the calculus drawing on the board, and I literally didn't know what was going on, right? Went to the faculty member for help, a man, and he simply said to me, women aren't any good at math, you should change your major. So I did. In fact, I lost my scholarship and had to change my entire educational path. So talk about, stories we could tell. When I was coming up for tenure at the University of Delaware, my department did not want to count any of my scholarship on women, because scholarship on women was not taken seriously at the time. So things have changed. That's the good news. I told you I would not be completely pessimistic here. But what I also hear from my women students, and I actually heard this morning from Dr. Charisse Winstead, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. My students come and they say, well, I don't think I want to work as hard as you do. And I gather that's something that many of you are hearing as well. Now, there's evidence based on a very large survey that was recently completed of doctoral students, both men and women, that many feel that the greedy, resistant institution is not going to accommodate their lives. Men and women, doctoral students, rate teaching colleges as more family-friendly. Right? When asked, 1/2 of male doctoral students and 1/3 of women students said they thought research universities were family friendly. So that's not very many. And there's actually evidence that they are right, because if you saw the report that comes out annually in the Chronicle of Higher Ed on great colleges to work for, I kind of went through and counted up. There are 62 colleges and universities on the list of American universities that are great to work for, and they're evaluated on a number of criteria, but one of them is work-life balance. Only 2 of the 62 that made the list were research universities, and I'll be happy to name them, Duke and Michigan. I think they've both had advanced projects. So you hear this in all kinds of reports you get from colleagues. Here are just a few of the things that I hear regularly, especially from women of color, but also from white women. They're traveling in long-distance relationships with many hours of commuting between jobs. They are the only one in a department and doing the invisible work of faculty of color. We've heard that throughout these 3 days. Women are not using some of the family-friendly policies that are in place in universities, our own included, because they fear the bias against them that will result from doing so. And this is confirmed by sociological research, by the way. Men, on the other hand, do use such policies and often use it just to get time off to write. And then, and there is some research on this as well, they get extra credit for being such good dads, whereas moms still suffer the mom penalty. Women in my generation are struggling to deal with elder care. We also heard that this morning, and I'm sorry I can't remember your name right now, of how much more difficult it was to be further away as your parents are aging. You begin to notice that your graduate students are asking questions about whether and when to have children, if that's what they choose. Or you notice that none of the senior leaders of your institution have young children still at home, if they have children, right? And you notice the stress and overwork that all of us are engaged in. Right? This is the empirical evidence of resistant institutions and greedy institutions. All right? So the sexism and racism in the academy now is probably not like, it's not what it used to be. Certainly the sexism I experienced was just overt and in your face, all right? But it is just as pernicious, and perhaps even more so, because so many people deny that they still exist. Although in this election cycle, we know they're not invisible anymore. So the things we need to change are very many, and I won't even begin to list them. But now, people in my generation, we baby boomers, we're retiring in record numbers. Yahoo, me included. Right? Institutions that are willing to change their policies and their culture to meet the needs of the upcoming generation, including many of you in this room, stand to gain the most if they really want to make their faculties more diverse. So I'm going to borrow from my colleague, sociologist Mary Ann Mason, because she's identified some of the assumptions in academia that deter the careers of women of color and white women and people of color. And actually, for that matter, may deter the careers of some white men. And what she's done is to also suggest some antidotes to these patterns. So here are some things we can do. So the assumption is that academia should be a full-time or an I have no time pursuit, right? But the antidote to that might be creating policies where people can change to part-time status or temporarily elongate the timelines over their academic lives. Here's the important proviso: without suffering career penalties. The assumption tends to be that the appropriate career trajectory is linear and without breaks. And we've certainly heard in all of your comments about your lives that that is simply not how people live their careers. All right? So what's the antidote to that? To be able to take time temporarily from academic lives for caregiving, whether that be children, elder care, or oneself, again, without penalty. An assumption: academic stars are assumed to be those who move through the ranks very quickly, right? And that can penalize people of color and women of color and white women. What do we do about that? And actually, I have a footnote here because some of us on campus heard Anna Maria Cauce, the president of the University of Washington, this past week, and she pointed to research that has been done in letters of recommendation and external review letters that talk about the term star applied only to men and rarely to women of color or white women. So we can become conscious. It's another one of those implicit biases that we can become aware of and stop practicing. The assumption is that having children, particularly for women, is somehow equated with less seriousness or less drive, when in fact it takes more. And so I'm going to leave us with a kind of vision, because I don't want to be totally pessimistic as a sociologist. Sometimes when I'm feeling like there's no possibility to change the course of the big tanker, I look to some of the classics for inspiration. And so in this case, I looked back to Alice Walker's essay, In Search of Our Mother's Garden, because she then identified the term womanist. Right? And here's how she defines it. From womanish, the opposite of girlish, the opposite of frivolous, irresponsible, not serious, a black feminist or feminist of color. From the black folk expression of mothers to female children, you're acting womanish. Usually referring to outrageous, audacious, courageous, or willful behavior, wanting to know more and in greater depth than what might be considered good for one. Interested in grown-up things, I'm adding like science. Acting grown up, being grown up, interchangeable with another black folk expression, quote, you trying to be grown, end quote. Responsible, in charge, serious. And then she goes on also, a woman who loves other women, sexually or non-sexually, appreciates and prefers women's culture, women's emotional flexibility, values tears as natural counterbalance of laughter and women's strength, committed to survival and wholeness of entire people, male and female, not a separatist, except periodically for health. And she ends by saying, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. So in a room full of womanists, in conclusion, I'm going to ask you to do this. To imagine, what would a womanist institution look like? It certainly does not look like where we are now. I'm actually not going to ask you to answer that question on the spot, but I am going to ask you to think about it. Because only if we dream about what we can do, what can be, can we take the steps to make it happen. And only then will we advance toward institutional transformation. It is our only path forward. Now, before I conclude, you've heard a lot of thanks, but I'm the last speaker up here at the podium, so I'm going to give quite a few thank yous. All right. The conference organizers, the speakers, the participants, I can't possibly name you all by name, but it has been just such a rich, rich weekend, and I know we'll all take it forward with us. All of you have contributed to this, but I do want to give some special thanks. First, to our advanced PIs who imagined this, John Sawyer, Pam Cook, Heather Doty, and Robin Andreasen. Could you all please stand and let us give you a round of applause? And then to Ann Boylan and Sharon Neal, the program co-chairs. Fantastic. And I'm not going to name them all, but they are listed in your program, the program committee members. What a phenomenal group, phenomenal. And last but not least, Lynn McDowell and Emily Bonestall, and you should both stand up too. Unbelievable, not a flaw. Thank you all.